Yeah, all right, everyone. We'd like to welcome the panel on AI ethics and policy. Please come on board.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the panel. We're going to try and get us. Hello. Try and get us back on schedule. Thanks for joining. So our panel today is on trust, ethics, and policy, or I think we can call it, we've all heard of the AI guardrails. This is the human guardrails, right? How are we going to build upon this technology, this disruptive and potentially destructive technology, and moderate ourselves? So I'll let all of our panelists introduce themselves, but just briefly starting with Ashu, he's going to play the role or the character of our venture capitalist who's seeking returns at all costs, any cost. And we have Shub here, our operator who's going to sell widgets regardless of the outcomes, unintended consequences. And we have Sunder here. He is our learned professor who is screaming the sky is falling. And then we have Mansi, our legislator / hired gun to all that are on the stage.
Who makes money either way?
Yeah, either
All
way,
of us.
either way. So Ashu, I'm going to start with you. Is it possible for the industry to regulate itself, or do you need regulators to come in and guide the development of AI?
You know, all technology at some abstraction has some regulatory framework that exists. So we're all regulated by law today. So I would never say there's no need for law. At the same time, for the vast majority of instances, the government and law has destroyed more value than it has created. Over centuries, over 150 countries, over a variety of economies. So I think but it's a necessary evil. Regulators and the legal infrastructure is a necessary evil, very important and very necessary evil. And so I think as we think about regulation, we just have to be careful. What is the cost of that regulation? What is the right time for the regulation? And I think the whole AI sort of regulation thing is completely overblown. I mean, it's a form of software. We've had AI for 25 years. AI is not a new thing. We are suddenly seeing it generate text, and because AI can generate text, it seems, oh my God, it's generating text or video or audio. But AI has been around. It's been around in production for at least 20, 25 years in different shapes or form. And it has been regulated in some shape or form for 20, 25 years with existing laws. Do those laws need to evolve? Perhaps. Should we have a conversation about it? Absolutely. But the need, I think, this sort of sudden fear that there is this new thing that is going to completely take over the world and that we suddenly need to go fight it, I think is completely blown out of proportion.
True to character, sounds like it. Sunder, do you think there is a possible global framework in which you can kind of allow the Ashus and Shubs of the world to build the technologies they need faster than other countries and other companies, while also kind of maintaining some semblance of?
So actually, thank you. First of all, this light makes me feel like I'm in an irrigation room. Where was I on the 9th of June? Yeah. So I come from this perspective as an academic economist, and both in terms of my research, but also what I teach my students, and I take a slightly long view of technology, not maybe going back to one of the earlier speakers who talked about the wheel, but if you just start with the steam engine and then go to electricity and then computing and then AI, as I think each of these four at least are, in my view, potentially, I know the previous three, but this one is potentially paradigm changing, right? So in that sense, it is pretty remarkable compared to many, many other technologies the human mind has come up with. And I'm at the bottom line, I'm pretty much of an optimist on these things, partly because, there are a couple of studies that were done most recently by a very well-known economist, Brad DeYoung, up the road, called "Slouching Towards Utopia," which is really worth reading, where he talks about the productivity, which is the heart of progress, pretty much hugs the x-axis till about 1870. And then it goes up like a hockey stick from 1870 to what he calls the long century. And this is a period that starts with electricity, through computing, through the medical discoveries of penicillin, antibiotics, and now AI, right? And in some ways, I think I've forgotten what ChatGPT's full form is, but I sort of think of GPT as general purpose technology. So the reason I think AI has taken us by storm, especially when it became open source, even though I agree with you that's been around for 25 odd years, I think the reason it's come to this is because it has a potential to alter lives in ways that I don't even think we know, just given where we are right now. The second thing to your question, where as a development economist and having spent the last 6 or 7 years in India, I think I think there's always, the technology has a two-edged sword, the positive edge of all that AI can do wonders, but I think all of us in the room also knows with all the other technology, this is downside. So the question is, how do you, with civil society, academics, government, public policy, private sector, how do you mitigate risk at a time when inclusion is an issue, joblessness is an issue, climate change is an issue, social justice is an issue, because all said and done, we have about 8 billion people on this planet, right? So I do want that conversation to happen. And in that context, I am more open in terms of thinking about how do you find the balance between markets and regulation. So the ultimate bottom line to me as an economist is the market system is maybe one of the most amazing human innovations in history that came about in about the 18th century, and we just did it without any central control. But as one of the previous speakers talked about, living in California as we did, it's an amazing, if you were to be on a drone watching this incredible movement of traffic, and the analogy of traffic and market systems has been written about before, and what physicists call order out of chaos. What makes it orderly is because there are some basic rules and governance and norms that we have learned over the years. So I think it's fairly certain that I think if AI is allowed to have those, and we all want that, then the question is, the debate will be what norms, what regulations, and how do you not stifle creativity? Because if the market system has shown us anything, it is that the ability for the human mind to be innovative, to solve the world's problem, I think I'm a big believer in that.
Mansi, a question for you. I mean, ultimately, don't you think there has to be some sort of, I guess, AI non-proliferation type of, agreement, right? Where everyone agrees, and we've talked about this in a few different of the panels, but rules of the road at a global level.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably the exact opposite of Ashu when it comes to this, because when I think of generative AI, and I will split from, AI being there for a long time. When you're thinking of generative AI, I think one of the bigger issues is the scientists that developed it don't quite understand why it's doing what it's doing. Now, when we're dealing with a technology that's like that, I think we need something bigger to govern it. The other thing I will say is I don't think government or regulation is what we call a necessary evil. I think that's what makes government, or at least in this crowd, sometimes regulation seem evil. But despite regulation, if you want to say that, we've been able to see so much success in this community, which would not be there otherwise. So I think the regulatory framework has always been balanced. And it is because of lobbies or all the things that we have. So I think that balance will still remain because of what humans want, right? We like to enjoy ourselves. We like to do X, Y, or Z, but we have a framework in which we agree that maybe we don't want more people to die, or we want to make sure people have X or Y or Z. And that's how you generally come up with government frameworks. When we look at the world, you're seeing some things which are being done in India to lift the economy. I don't think we want to see that stop. So when you're looking at AI, I think we want to make sure that all of that is still there and in some kind of balance. I think we will want to see a global framework, I don't think we want to see it only benefiting a very few. So I'm hoping that's where we go. But otherwise, we might see something else. I don't know the future. This is the unknowns, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns are very vast, I think, with this technology. So.
And Shub, turning to the technology, I mean, is it, you hear after obviously ChatGPT and open source, that the genie is out of the bottle. Is that true, or can technology throttle to allow regulation the opportunity to keep up?
Yeah, I think technology definitely can. See, what we are debating since this morning across several panels and discussions is the spectrum between innovation on one hand and regulations on the other hand. And Ashu is clearly very influenced by Bill Gurley's regulatory capture thesis. And he feels that regulations are meant to destroy innovation by default, right? The other end of, another way to think about this is for smaller companies, it's probably largely true because smaller companies need to be nimble, they need to make decisions quickly, and I'm running a company that's about $160 million, so I understand what you're saying, right? We can't afford to have a large staff of lawyers who can deal with a bunch of regulations. But on the other hand, large companies, the Googles and Facebooks of the world, Metas of the world, given the volume of data they have about us, if we have no framework to govern their actions, then it may lead to situations which are net negative for the society. And hence, unfortunately, Ashu, although I'm sitting on this side, I kind of agree with what these other two individuals are saying. Coming back to your question, technology can actually help in, we are actually working with several large enterprises where we are helping them set up their responsible AI teams. Because for large companies, by the way, it's not just about following the regulations so that they don't get in trouble, but they have to self-regulate themselves. Otherwise, they face other potential implications, right? There is reputational damage and so on, right? So there are techniques, and I don't mean to get too technical here, but there are techniques like differential privacy algorithms, which have been around for a long time. I mean, you can tune your large language models in a way so that and yes, you have to compromise on the accuracy to some extent, but you can do it in a way so that you can create those frameworks so that you can still make sure that the data security is not compromised, and you are able to mitigate risks due to bias and other problems. So yeah, it's possible to do that.
If I can pick up on the thread, I'll pick on what Sunder said. There's no debate that eventually all societies have to optimize for the greater good of society. So the question is not, do you optimize for a small set of individuals propagating or benefiting from the technology or society? For a society to exist, you have to find some sort of global optimization as against a local optimization. The question is, what is it that is going to lead to that global optimization? Imagine for a minute if you were trying to regulate steam engines as they were being built, and someone was deciding what the size of the wheel should be, what the size of the piston should be. Oh, we should allow the piston to have this many piston strokes, and by the way, the steam engine pressure with this. I mean, we would not have steam engines, and we would all be worse off. The manufacturers and the innovators would be worse off, but society as a whole would be much worse off. Imagine for a minute if we were doing the same thing to PCs. Someone was trying to decide which operating system should work, what kind of IO format would be allowed, what kind of networking standards should win, what kind of motherboard should, there are a million decisions that get made around any new technology. And the number of decisions has continued to grow, not shrink. And whenever regulators have attempted to regulate technology at that abstraction, They have destroyed value for society. You know, it's actually not an investor versus, investors will make money regardless. If they invest on the, you know, there's a set regulatory framework, you'll find a way to work within the regulatory framework to make money. Entrepreneurs will actually make money regardless. So it's actually not a question of regulation versus investors or regulation versus entrepreneurs. It is actually a fundamental question of regulation and regulators versus society. The damage that is done by regulators is not to us for the large part. We figure out a way to navigate it. It is the damage that regulation will do to overall society and the impact, the positive impact that is possible with any technology on society. And it's not because regulators are good or bad. It's not a value judgment. They're neither. They have biases, they have objectives that they are trying to meet, they have political goals, they have financial goals, they're trying to meet their goals. They have, you know, Lena wants to get promoted, whatever, go run an election, she's doing whatever it takes for her to win her election. And she should, you know, she's a politician. The question is that when within their constraints, they start to put constraints on what is possible for society, you're going to destroy value. And so that's the real question, is how do we enable AI to increase global GDP at a pace that uplifts another? There are 8 billion people in the world, and those 8 billion people in the world deserve to have the power of technology. Because if you have a model that is not technology intensive, we will destroy the planet in the process of giving 8 billion people food, in the process of giving them a way to sort of work, in the process of giving them all the benefits that we enjoy in a very resource-intensive society. So I think that's the core question that we have to solve as we think about regulating AI or any new technology, for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, well, and when I think about it, I think that the immediate concerns are obviously job displacement, right? So, I mean, that's a form of regulation. We have to say, okay, well, if we're going to displace all of these jobs, how are we going to account for that? And Mansi, in one of our conversations, you were talking about universal income, right? How do you see that playing into this, and how does that get funded if that's a solution?
Yeah, I don't know that it's the right solution. I will start there, even though I think that that's the solution that's most talked about. I think at least humans right now, there's a lot of value derived from doing work that I think that if you just give universal basic income, I'm not sure psychologically it's going to be the right answer. But I do think that as these companies grow and agents or whatever it may be displacing jobs, maybe there is some tax, which everyone hates, I know, that you have to apply when that work goes away, right? Because I do think it's fulfilling and deeply fulfilling for people to be able to do good work. For all of us who get up every day, like there is something to that cadence that gives us livelihood. And so when we think about large systems and how we've been doing something for so many years, to just crush that, we really have to think of all of the whole system, right? And I think that's why I'm not sure UBI is necessarily the answer, but it's the answer that's put out there all the time.
Sunder, what do you think?
No, so I think UBI is being talked about, and the question always comes back to how do you fund UBI, because there's still public debts and inflation. Governments have not escaped solving that problem. But I think going back to your question about how do you fund this, but also whether there should be a global conversation, you know, so I don't know who said this, but there's a saying that we learn from history that we never seem to learn from history, right? But sometimes I think history, interestingly, does provide lessons. And to your point about the regulation, Ashu, I mean, much as I finished talking about the wonders of the market system and price mechanism and innovation and so on, it brought us down to our knees in the 1930s with Great Depression. But for Keynes and FDR's New Deal, which unleashed the modern involvement of the state, it rejuvenated capitalism to where it is today. And I think we have answered that debate about the state getting too interventionist when the Soviet Union collapsed. I think the question really comes as there are only variations of market capitalism. And the question is, do you want light touch regulation, or do you want it such a way that we slide into surveillance capitalism where the state or a company controls all the data and privacy, and then the little person on the street is left fending for themselves, right? So I suspect all of us would agree the debate is going to be in the details of what is the scope for regulation, because you need a larger good. And I think that's the devil is in the details rather than the either or. I don't think anyone is saying that we need a very activist interventionist regulatory framework, or do you need nothing, because nothing makes free enterprise, as I was telling Ajay the other day on a call, free for all becomes anarchy, and nobody wants anarchy, right? So we live in societies, and private sector plays a huge role, in my view, along with the investor class, along with the entrepreneur class, along with civil society and government. And we may have lost the ability to find common ground, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we had it in the past, in the 30s. And my last point, Ajay, to answer your question, the thing that I always talk about to my students is somehow we found the will. I come from Vermont, in the neighboring state of New Hampshire in 1944. We met as a global system. Granted, they were very small countries because we are still imperialism, to create Bretton Woods and create the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO and so on. So the question is on big ticket items like climate change and AI, whether we can have the will to create a global commons, because you cannot stop these at national boundaries.
Absolutely. Shub, what do you think in terms of I guess you have the top 5 or 6 companies in the U.S. leading. Where do you see that going? Is it U.S.? Is it India? Is it China? Is it a coalition of countries that end up at the top? Given that there's so many different regulations, you have China, who obviously, is able to surveil its citizens, and we have we don't have an appetite for that here. So how do you see that developing?
I have to be careful what I say, because, when you mentioned China and regulations, I was chuckling. But that aside, as far as technology-related regulations are concerned, I've always felt EU has done the best job. And even in this case, I have seen the framework they have put together, where it's a risk stratification model versus mandating certain decisions in a certain way. So I like the way they're doing it, and I feel eventually the world will follow that order, or at least similar frameworks. The same thing happened with GDPR, and now CCP and other guidelines are following up. I think the same thing will happen with AI-related regulations too.
Okay. Now, I mean, just taking that example, if you look at kind of at least the current thinking in terms of AI leadership, I would say most people, would say that Europe is probably led in the regulations, but maybe not as much in development. Is that?
There are other different reasons because of which I think innovation has fallen behind in EU, but it's not related to regulations. I think there are other socioeconomic policies which have impacted innovation in some of those countries, but it's not because of regulations.
Shu, any thoughts there? Any masala you want to add here?
Europe is the past, and we are the present and the future, and so the past is the past. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the past.
I think we all have to think a little bit about the past, because I think we should learn from history. And I think it's incumbent upon us to learn from history. I think that's why you're seeing the EU put out a framework as early as it is, because with social media, it did not. And all of, that data got sucked up for its citizens. And they're a little bit more, I think they take steps and create frameworks to really protect their citizenship. I think we do that a little bit less. You have seen states step up more recently when it comes to AI. Utah has its own set of AI rules. So if you're operating in Utah, know that they're different. Tennessee has a different set of rules in AI. So states are now passing AI rules and regulations because the country hasn't yet. But unfortunately, they're not all the same. So that's going to be somewhat difficult. That said, when we think of startups in the US, we look at regulation, but we think about what's always best for the consumer. And I will say, when you think of basically all of the unicorns that have come out of the Bay Area, none of them followed regulation to a T, right? We kind of skirted around it a little bit with probably some very good legal memos somewhere. And then decided to go full speed ahead, right? We didn't need taxi cab, what do you call it, medallions? Instead, we have Uber. So just think through how we got there. And we've always kind of been what is best for the consumer. And the other thing I will say is most people don't seem to really care about privacy. And that's what we've learned over the, I would say last 2 decades, where you're willing, free is more important than privacy. And so it's unfortunate, but that's what the larger audience has told us. And so when you see some of these regulatory frameworks, this is where I might agree with you, Ashu, that we in the US tend to follow the consumer more than we are protecting the consumer. What is it that the consumers say they want? Not, how do I make sure you're going to be okay later? So that's the
So
difference.
let me
Is there
just build on that, because I think that is where I do agree. Look, eventually, whether it's investors, startups, or large companies, we all have to and want to live in the context of a society, and that society has consumers, and all regulation and law has to exist in subservience to the benefit of the consumer, however the consumers choose to define that benefit. And again, sort of without getting to the debate in Europe, in the US, it's very clear that consumers value that innovation, whether that's innovation is in the form of better healthcare, or it is in the form of low-cost education, or it is in the form of something else. And we have to serve that need. And to the extent that people are violating there laws exist. You don't actually have to regulate AI differently from just regulating. Like, if I'm stealing someone's data, that's illegal. That's already illegal. You don't need a new law for that, and no one should do that. So I think and will these legal frameworks need nuance and improvements? For sure, because new technology sort of pushes the boundaries in a variety of ways. My meta point is different. It is that this is it's incremental sounds terrible because it is pretty fundamental, but it's another new technology. You didn't need to create a new legal framework to say this is how you should make computers, or this is how you should make steam engines. I don't think you actually need a new regulatory framework for this is how you should train an AI model, and this is what you can do with the model. Because the technology to train models is changing every year. Any framework you make today is going to be irrelevant by the time it becomes law, because how you train models or how you use models is going to change. I think as society, we have to think about what is right for society. And if in reality, AI ends up putting everyone in society out of work, well, there'll be no one to pay for the AI, so we wouldn't have a society. So I doubt that will happen. Computers didn't put society out of work. Steam engines didn't put society out of work. So I also think some of this is just fear-mongering for the sake of fear-mongering. Like, we've got to let AI play out, and it has to play out in a way that benefits society. I don't think there's any debate there.
I agree with, actually, on the job displacement question that you had asked earlier. I actually disagree with you that there should be an additional tax for that, because that will lead to value destruction, in my opinion. Today, most of the jobs that will likely be impacted, at least in the near term, because of Gen AI, is going to be white-collar jobs. And I think, generally speaking, white-collar jobs, people in white-collar jobs are capable to get reskilled, and they will have to go through that. No amount of, I think, taxes will solve that problem. In fact, it will increase the problem. Eventually, we may see an impact in blue-collar jobs, because we will see taxis that are going to be driven without Uber taxis. Ubers will be driven without drivers, right? And at that point, but I'm hopeful that by then we would have thought through this, because that's not going to happen for another 10 years or so. We would have come up with better frameworks to address this so that it doesn't cause too much disruption to unemployment in general.
No, I get that, but I think there's also the AI and mobile and all these have created opportunities for people to think about jobs and employment differently, right? It's created the single entrepreneur, and now you add AI to it, and it creates the opportunity for, it's not here yet, but the, sub 10-person billion-dollar company, right? So it's going to change what work is, right? You're no longer necessarily going to have to seek out a job. You're going to have to seek out what it is you want to do. But between now and then, I don't think that there's someone out there looking out for the consumer to say, like, okay, this is how your data has been used, right? We've educated all these models. Now we can control your every interaction through the click of a like and all of that, right? We don't see that there. And so I think that is a risk to society, right? In terms of pushing the masses in a certain way without real independent thought. Any thoughts there?
No, I think that you've said it, you articulated it very well. I think it sort of summarizes the sort of what I'm hearing as the sort of the meta point connecting all of us. The thing that, Ashu, I'll take a slightly, even though in principle I agree with you, but I take a disagreement on the steam engine, because steam came about when there was no regulatory framework, right? I think we are wizened up in the last 100 years, that's why my previous point about why regulators came into the picture. But I think it's always a question of the pendulum. When it goes too far, we think the regulatory framework is strangling innovation, so we want to pull it back this way. You don't want to go to the other extreme, because that creates anarchy of a different kind. So it's really finding that sweet spot. And it's a very boring comment that says, truth is neither white is white nor black is black, it's in the shades of the gray, right? So it literally comes to that as, how do you maximize the innovation potential? And I do think the disagreement I would have is AI, I don't feel, and I could be wrong on this, I don't feel it's just yet another technology. I think it is like electricity or computing, which spanned 100 years difference, that changed the entire way in which we organize ourselves as humanity. And I think AI has that potential. And so my point is, maybe, even though we don't seem to learn, maybe this time we try and figure out that we don't go headlong and then come back and clean up, because that is always costlier, politically, socially, economically, is maybe try and figure out about safety nets and guardrails a little bit more sooner as the process is unfolding. That's really where I'm coming down.
Thank you for that. I think we're just about at time. Question from the audience?
Ajay, great job. I know it's a tough question, tough topic, and even tougher panelist. So great job. My question is really, regulation comes from the risk and the liabilities associated with the risk. I would like each panelist to give me one example of, because Dr. Ramaswamy mentioned that, it's a new technology, completely different, right? If there is something completely different, there must be some risk in there and some liability. Give one example of each one of you. What is the risk that you see and the liability that will create, which probably lead to some regulation, or at least for law firms, we need to protect our clients, so put it into all the agreements.
Well, I guess there's a lot of risks, I think, that come with AI. I think it comes with a lot of times what humans know about AI and don't know about AI, especially if you're deploying it within your organizations. But we are actually seeing some of the worst of AI. I don't know if you all heard about when you're seeing it being used on even like banks, right? Where you can copy a voice and basically take money, and then you have no way of getting it back. You're seeing all of that malware. I mean, we're seeing a lot of really active ways of using AI to do really harmful things using the internet. And the way I kind of see it is AI is really, it sucked up all of human knowledge as much as was on the internet. And so it's able to act human. So it's basically all the risks associated with humans is also associated with AI. So any risk we have as a society maybe is a little bit greater because bad actors have a lot more at their fingertips. But I think it's just going to make it easier on the deep fake side, on the side of all of this. I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know if there's a clause you can put in agreements that's going to fix that, though, unfortunately, right? Other than to tell humans what they can and cannot do.
I think that's really good question, and I'll give you two-level answer. One is, I think, as we have talked about throughout this day, at the very bottom of this entire stack is data, which is the currency of the century, or the language. I tell my students, instead of learning Mandarin and Spanish, might as well do data science also, right? But it raises this other question about, in this age of data and machines, what does it actually mean to be human, right? The human element is an important, and I say this as an educator and somebody who deals with young minds. The reason I bring it is data has both security and privacy issues about who controls and what's the agency of the person whose data has been manipulated or could be manipulated. So that is a potential risk, and I am not saying no progress is risk-free, right? So the question of tolerance of risk, 5%, 7%, whatever the confidence interval risk you want to take is. The bigger question is, and maybe I'll end on a much more philosophical note, as the educator in this, what I think about it is, there's a wonderful quote from 100 years ago, T.S. Eliot. He says, "Where is the wisdom that is lost in all the knowledge? Where is the knowledge that's lost in all the information?" To which I also add, as an economist, where's the information that's lost in all the data? So we are awash with data. We are awash with information. We might be becoming less knowledgeable. Forget about wisdom, right? So the question is for my tribe, teachers, professors, academics, how do we continue to teach students to what you would call learn, unlearn, relearn, what is knowledge? Because all they're getting is information, and information is not knowledge.
So yeah, look, risk is a trade-off. That's why it's called a score. I run a tech services, tech solutions company in AI, and when I'm signing a new MSA with a customer, with a client, there are certain times in which I have to make that call, right? They will, for example, if I'm signing up with a Fortune 10 company, I know they'll not be flexible at all in terms of the terms they already have in their standard MSA boilerplate. So I'll have to make the call and say, okay, I am willing to concede because of the potential upside. And same thing from a data perspective, right? When we receive data from our customers to build certain kind of algorithms, sometimes customers are actually less careful, right? They may end up sending me a file with PII data, right? And I may not have the regulatory clearance to handle that information. So I have to say that, hey, I can't do this, even if it comes at the cost of some business. So those trade-offs are decisions that we have to make on a day-to-day basis.
So when I think about risk with AI broadly, and this is a gross oversimplification, I put them into two buckets. Bucket one, Mansi talked about, which is actually a very big bucket, which is bad actors and state actors. Actually, the biggest risk with AI is state actors, whether it is our state or the Russian state or the Chinese state, using AI. But no regulation is going to solve that because state actors aren't regulated. So that's the biggest risk. But to the extent that that risk exists, it's governed by existing law to the extent that you can govern it. Whether you use AI or you use some other technology, crime is crime. And I think that risk is huge, by the way. I actually think the risk of AI as the next new technology being used by criminals is big, and the FBI and other, crime-fighting organizations should worry about it. I'm not sure any regulation will solve that problem. That's a problem for all technology. I think the other risk that we do think about as investors, as entrepreneurs, is AI is nothing but a prediction machine, whether it's generative AI or traditional AI or GANs or pick your favorite version of an AI model. All AI is a prediction machine. It predicts something. No prediction is deterministic. It has a confidence score. Predictions will go wrong by mistake. All predictions are made on some data. And therefore, the best way to think about AI risk is think of AI as a toddler. And a toddler that is learning and changing every day. And today it's going to do something right, and tomorrow it's going to do something wrong. That's what toddlers do. And so to that extent, AI has that risk. And anyone who is using AI as an entrepreneur or as a company, it is incumbent upon them, to be fair, to make sure that as you're using these models, you understand what the guardrails of what these models can and cannot do. I mean, the obvious things are, you take a credit scoring model and you train a certain data set. Well, very quickly, credit scoring models will start to violate all kinds of regulation around lending. Because, for obvious reasons, you'll see a certain pattern of behavior, but that, the model is going to get trained on a pattern of behavior, which is true, but that pattern of behavior violates fair lending laws. So you've got to manage that. That's not a new thing. Again, if you're lending money with or without AI, you need to follow the law. And hopefully, if you're doing that, you're doing that. If you are matching people to jobs, it is very easy for an AI model to go vary and make the same mistakes that human beings make. Again, not a new thing. And that is illegal today. You don't need a new law for that. It is illegal to have bias in matching people to opportunity, and it is incumbent upon those vendors to follow that law. So not for a minute am I saying don't follow the law. I'm just saying in general, for most of the issues that exist today with AI, the regulation is very clear. Bad actors choose not to follow it, and there is nothing that you can do about bad actors with regulation. And for good actors, I think it is incumbent on all good actors to recognize that AI does have a lot of risk. I mean, any powerful new technology comes with risk, and you have to invest in managing that risk.
Thank you. And my answer to that is I think the greatest risk right now is data ownership, and that extending to the individual. Right now, we live in a world where we don't own our own data, which leads to all sorts of unintended consequences, and including, someone being able to take your own persona, right? So I think then in the near term, that's the biggest issue. And in the long term, it's being able to disengage both regulatorily and from a technical perspective from AI if you choose to, right? As we get to become more of a digital society, being able to disengage, so.
Ajay, can I add something really
Sure.
quick? And this is not directly related to this question, but so I have a 9-year-old child, and he was asking me over dinner the other day. So the discussion we were having was artificial intelligence, and he calls me Baba. So he said, Baba, how can intelligence be artificial? Because for him, intelligence is very innate to human thinking, natural thinking. And we went back and forth, and then eventually we both gave up, and we conceded that human intelligence will always prevail over artificial intelligence. So, yeah.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you, everybody.